Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, March 20th, the House Transportation Committee, and we are focusing on our miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, S309. And this morning, we're going to be focusing on sections 31 and 32 that have to do with lights and equipment. And to talk with us about this section is Sergeant Jack Mateer. Am I pressing your last name?
Sergeant Jacob Mateer.
Okay, we have Jacob. I would like to get your name right. So welcome to the committee. We haven't had you yet, so it's nice to meet you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Is this language that you recommended for the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill?
It is. It changed slightly
Okay.
as it left us.
So it'd be good to hear,
Arrived here.
all, the context and how things have changed and whether you support the language as currently written. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. My name is Sergeant Jacob Mateer. I'm with the Vermont State Police, and I am currently the supervisor of the Marine Division and the designated boating law administrator for the state of Vermont. The United States Coast Guard has a grant. It's called the Recreational Boating Safety Grant that all 50 states and 6 territories participate in annually. It's a recurring grant that provides money for recreational boating safety in the states. In Vermont, we use that money to support Marine Division and boater safety throughout the state with the Vermont State Police and other agencies. The Colchester Police Department, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife, the wardens, they receive money from this. The Grand Isle Sheriff's Department, they receive money from this grant. And the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles receives funding through this grant that helps provide the ability to conduct safety inspections and law enforcement patrols on the waterways, respond to accidents and incidents on the water, and it supports boater education and safety throughout the state. The Vermont State Police also funds the underwater recovery team, formerly known as our scuba team, through this grant. So this grant has significant impact on the state of Vermont. As part of the grant management, the Coast Guard conducted a desk review of our program in the spring and early summer of 2023. During this review, we submitted numerous documents and procedures to the Coast Guard for review, and they returned their findings and found that we had several items out of compliance with their federal regulations and their rules. There were approximately 10 to 12 action items that they noted that they requested that we come into compliance with or potentially risk losing some of the funds that we receive in this recreational boater safety grant. Among these items were the 2 items that are in this bill, an update to language, basically, for Title 23 VSA Section 3307, an exemption from Vermont numbering, and Title 23 VSA Section 3306, which deals with fire extinguisher requirements on vessels. Regarding the fire extinguishers first, since numerically that comes first, in Section 31 in this proposed legislation, the Coast Guard made modifications to their requirements for fire extinguisher carriage on vessels. They started back in 2016, I believe, and they updated their requirements from an older classification system that required what they called B1 and B2 fire extinguishers to be carried on vessels. That classification was weight-based on the amount of extinguisher material in the fire extinguisher. They updated their requirements to come in line with the UL listed performance-based criteria for fire extinguishers, which reclassified the fire extinguishers as 5B and 20B extinguishers. So those are no longer weight-based, but performance-based requirements. And it's UL listed now with the new requirements. Those went into effect for newly manufactured vessels in 2018. And the Coast Guard regulation and requirements became enforced and in effect in April of 2022. All of the states were required to have adopted this new legislation and requirement by then. We had previously modified the state law in Vermont to incorporate the new language of the 5B and the 20B fire extinguishers. But in particular, we missed a section of the federal law that provided an exemption for vessels manufactured between 1953 and 2017 that provided an exemption so that boat owners didn't have to go buy new fire extinguishers if their previously approved fire extinguishers were still fully functional and serviceable. So we incorporated language that included this exemption that as long as the previously approved fire extinguishers in that time frame of vessels manufactured between 1953 and 2017 are still serviceable and fully functional, they can keep those and they will not be in violation of the law. When those are no longer serviceable and are expired, when they have to purchase a new fire extinguisher, they need to upgrade to the current 5B, 20B fire extinguishers.
So as long as, even though there might be older fire extinguishers, but they are serviceable, so they essentially work.
Then they can keep those and they don't need to replace them. That's the big change with this section of the law. We already had the verbiage incorporating the 5B and the 20B. We did not change the number of fire extinguishers that are required for vessels. That's the same as it was previously. And if a vessel had a fixed fire extinguisher system, the regulations, basically they can have one less fire extinguisher on board if they have fixed fire suppression systems in the machinery space. And we also maintained an exemption where a motorboat that has an open hull design that is not going to trap any fumes, they are not required to carry a fire extinguisher if they're not carrying passengers for hire. The Coast Guard's main concern with fire extinguishers is the trapped fuel vapors becoming an explosion or fire hazard and being able to extinguish those if you're on the water, and that should happen. This classification of fire extinguisher will also work on fires of combustible material. Like if you had paper that caught on fire on board, they would also work to put out that.
Sean?
Thank you. So full disclosure, I had a conversation with the sergeant before we started this morning, trying to run down a rumor that came out of the other body. There might have been a dust up this language regarding some verbiage that was changed from the federal regulations, and I was wondering, Sergeant, if you comment on it. It has to do with the language that says not fewer than one extinguisher. Is that the federal language, or or is the federal language different than this one?
The language that I had submitted to the Coast Guard for approval originally said one fire extinguisher, two fire extinguishers, and so on. It didn't say no fewer than one fire extinguisher or no fewer than two fire extinguishers or.
So this is not fewer than, it's not the federal Coast Guard language.
It's not I would have to double check with the language. It's in several spots in the federal statute where they talk about fire extinguishers, and it's a lot of the requirements are pictures and diagram based in the federal laws to try to simplify what fire extinguishers are required.
Yep.
But I believe it's 1, 2, 3, not no fewer than.
So if you do that and just shoot us back an email or contact our committee system with your results of your research.
Yes, I could.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, I mean, is that a substantive change? I mean, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, that I'm clear.
My concern is that we're following and agreed to
Federal law. It's
Federal
different,
law.
yeah.
Agreed. If the agency has agreed to that, it should be, we should present the agreed to language.
Sure, okay. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
that there's not something.
I don't want to get in the middle of that. I'd rather get in the middle of the other body, but I don't want to get in the middle of the Coast Guard and the agency.
Sure. Okay, so I saw a few other hands, Representative Dodge, and then I saw some other hands over here too.
I admit that I had not thought about very large boats in Vermont. And so I'm just wondering how many vessels are we trying to regulate here? Are there, I tried to kind of look up a few, like, information about fire extinguishers for marine vessels, and they're not that expensive, and I just wonder, why would we make a carve out to allow something in 1950? To still remain on a boat if a newer one, it isn't that much more money, it's like $30 or $20 cases, and I get that the fixed ones are probably a bigger deal, but those are only gonna be for really large vessels, and I can't find out how many of those large marine vessels are in Lake Champlain.
I don't know the number broken up by size off the top of my head, but when we started researching this, I asked the question from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they broke down that in 2023, there were 3,492 registered vessels, model year 2018 and up. So those are the ones that were already manufactured and are required to have the new classification of fire extinguisher. There were 24,140 vessels that fell in the exemption period from 1953 to 2017.
You repeat the number, is 21,000?
24,140. So we
That category, okay.
generally, I have only been in this position for just over a year, but we seem to fluctuate registered vessels in Vermont somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 a year. So the vast majority fall into that exemption
Due to size.
due to year,
Year
due to
manufacturing.
year.
Okay, so 2018 and up?
2018 and up is
About 3,000.
3,500 approximately. And they should have all been manufactured with this classification standard.
And you're comfortable with that safety? I mean, this is about safety. I mean, it's in alignment, to be in alignment with the federal, and so I guess my question to follow up, unless I didn't want to cut you
Yeah,
off.
no, I'm.
Is this carve out exist in the federal law?
It does,
Okay,
yes. So the federal law, they updated it for safety purposes, but they recognized that that would create a financial burden on people that had a year prior, a perfectly fine and acceptable fire extinguisher. So they made the exemption to not put a burden on those boaters, but require them to upgrade to the new standard when their fire extinguishers are no longer serviceable and they have to buy new ones.
I think I saw a couple minutes, I saw Representative Burke.
Yeah, so any motorboat, any boat with a motor in the state of Vermont needs to be registered, is that correct? Or-
Not every motorboat needs to be registered. There are exemptions to some, like lifeboats. But any motorboat needs
Even
to,
a little boat with a motor.
that is not exempt from the fire extinguisher regulations needs to have one. So if your lifeboat was constructed in such a manner that it had an enclosed machinery space where fumes could build up, it would still need to have the fire extinguisher.
But a regular motorboat with a gas tank with a valve hooked into the motor, that doesn't need a fire extinguisher.
Like a smaller fishing boat with an,
Or a boat, but boat water skiing or whatever, just a tank that's portable that we put in the boat and take out.
if it doesn't have space where fumes could build up, it does not need to have a fire extinguisher. But if it's got compartments below the deck where if you spilled gas and fumes could be captured, then it would need that.
You're just talking about smaller.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's so many ways of manufacturing
Yeah.
boats. Like personal watercraft are very small, but they can have fumes build up in their interior storage tanks, so they need to have a fire extinguisher. So you can have a larger, I say larger, that's all relative to each person, but a completely open hull river boat where the tank is beside the outboard engine and it's tiller design with no compartments, and you would not need a fire extinguisher there.
Thank you.
I guess, Jesse, other questions on this side? Okay. But I think we went through that, does that cover, oh, and then there's Vermont numbering provisions, right? Should we enter into for that territory?
Certainly. The exemptions from Vermont numbering under Title 23, Section 3307, provides that if you have your motorboat in Vermont and it's required to be registered, there are certain exemptions where you wouldn't need to Vermont registration. You could keep your approved out-of-state or federal registration, use your boat in Vermont, and then go back home to where you primarily use the boat, and you would not need to register in Vermont. The federal guideline for reciprocity for out-of-state vessels operating in Vermont is 60 days throughout the year. If you operate your vessel more than 60 days in Vermont, federally, you would need to register in Vermont because that becomes the primary operating state for you at that point. We had previously had a 90-day reciprocity, which was a little out of line with even other parts of our Vermont law. Section 3307A had a 60-day requirement for obtaining a validation sticker. So that would mean you could be registered in another state, but if your vessel was in Vermont for 60 days, you had to buy a validation sticker, which is the same price as a registration sticker. So there's no financial real change to this. Our change is just falling in line with the 60-day reciprocity versus 90 days for registration in Vermont. And that would fall in line with our already existing registration or legislation requiring a validation sticker. So there are two pieces to that. The validation sticker is a colored sticker that goes on your vessel for the year. And then there's the registration, which is the numbers assigned by DMV to that vessel. So currently you could have, say, a New Hampshire registered vessel in Vermont, and if it stayed for 80 days, you had to purchase a validation sticker from Vermont. This moves those two deadlines so that they're the same. So if you're in the state for more than 60 days, you need to be registered and have a validation sticker, which is all the same fee. The real benefit to that is knowing which vessels are being operated in the state and having an accurate number of vessels that are primarily operated in Vermont. It also has a side benefit of the recreational boater safety grant is the amount of funding received by each state is based off of the number of registered vessels in the state. So if we have more vessels operating in Vermont than are registered, we are receiving less of the federal funding than we could receive if we had an accurate number of states that are, or vessels that are primarily operating in the state. So this would put us in line with having a better understanding of how many motorboats are operating in Vermont, and the change would put us in compliance with the federal guidelines of 60-day reciprocity across the country and the US states. And I'm not sure I explained that clearly, so I'm sure there's going to be some questions.
Okay, well, but I think in summary, this is really to align with some federal. This is, both of these sections of our bill are part of, a reviewing of statutes and making sure that they're in alignment with
Federal guidelines.
But I think we have a question.
Yeah,
Representative
thank you,
Crouch.
Madam Chair. Yeah, I don't seem to have a problem with it. It seems to all make sense. Just, if I have a boat, I live in Maine, but then I come and vacation here for, I'm fortunate enough to come for the summer. And in more than 60 days, I would need to register my boat in Vermont. But I also need to register it in Maine if I'm there the other, 10 months. And
If
so
you-
does a boat have two registered in two states?
It can be. So if you went back and used your boat those other 10 months, and Vermont, the boating season is so
Yeah.
short that 60 days encompasses most of it. And there are
Longer, but go ahead.
there are people that fall into that category that live in New Hampshire and register all their vehicles and all of their toys in New Hampshire, but they have a camp in Vermont and they dock the boat at their camp, and it's days in Vermont, and they use it during the summer in Vermont, and then they bring it back. So if you were operating more than 60 days in the state, you would have to do both, I guess.
Yeah,
And
so
that would be,
would you have two sets of numbers?
you would, each state would be different, so you'd be going back
But
and
this,
forth with,
but assuming New
Numbers.
Hampshire gets these same grants, they need to follow the same rules. So they would have
Right.
this same rule that says if you're here in New Hampshire more than 60 days, you need to register the boat in New Hampshire.
if you're going to use it there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Kate and Representative Lally and Representative Dodge?
Yes, I was kind of wondering how this works with New York vessels and with Canadian vessels, since we all share the lake. And how you figure out, just how you make those determinations.
There's reciprocity among the states for most of all of this boating law. In particular, New Hampshire and New York, we have cooperating laws and reciprocity. So like Lake Champlain and the Connecticut River, if you're okay to be in both of them and come back and forth between the the two states. Your primary state, if you're a New York resident and you're launching from New York and you live in New York, would be New York, and coming and looping around into Lake Champlain would not require you to be registered in Vermont. The same with the Connecticut River on the other side. And Canadian vessels, they could be, if they kept their vessel in Vermont for over the 60 days, they would need to comply. I don't know how, I don't have an accurate number, but I don't think there's that many of them that stay down here for that length of time, but they would need to fall in line with this requirement if they were here for more than 60 days. There's a provision about federally documented vessels, and if they're federally documented, I believe they would just need to do the validation sticker under section 3307A, which ends up being the same fee as the Vermont registration for motorboat. So it wouldn't change the fees for anybody that are already existing. But some vessels would need to be, if they weren't registered in Vermont, they would have to go through the registration and the documentation process in Vermont if they're here over the 60 days. And this DMV will send updates from state to state throughout the year with lists of vessels that have registered, like they've gone from Vermont and they've gone to, say, Massachusetts or New Hampshire, and they've registered there. They will send me those lists, and I send that to DMV so they can be removed from our list of registered vessels. So there is a flow back and forth all year of vessel registrations changing when people move or change their state of primary operation.
Does this, how do you account for people who are anchoring? Where in my town, Shelburne, we're noticing many Canadian vessels coming in and anchoring. And I was just wondering how that is, how do you keep track of that?
Enforcement of this is a whole nother matter. That's very difficult to do because we don't document necessarily, I encountered an out-of-state vessel on this day, and then go back 60 days later to check to see if they're still there. And it would be more of a enforcement would come down to the conversation and the interaction and speaking with the person while you're talking with them, finding out, we keep our vessel here all year long. This is the only place we boat. And then, okay, well, you need to register in Vermont as your primary place of operation. And I don't know of any law enforcement agency in the state that has the resources to be able to start keeping track. And
So we start with a more coherent process, and then hopefully that makes enforcement easier, which understanding that that's a whole other area. Is that sort of?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yes.
right, thank you.
And some people I know, getting back to the enforcement part, I know some of the troopers that do enforcement on the smaller lakes in their areas have commented that I patrol here. I know these people. I know they have a camp here and they summer here and they're here all year, but their boat is registered from, say, New Hampshire. And so there is an opportunity for observations, and it sticks in your mind, or you meet people and you learn about your community. And there might be some cases where it would be easier than others, but it would be mostly probably recognizing that you've encountered the person, or they're foreign is the wrong word, but out of non-Vermont registration, but maybe they've got a Vermont vessel inspection sticker for the year. And that might indicate this vessel has been here a while because they've had a safety inspection conducted and they're still here. Maybe I'd ask that question. Do you keep your boat here all summer? And see where that goes, but enforcement would be more difficult.
So I think we've got 10 more minutes and I know we have a few more questions. And I just want to say that on this section of the only change is changing it from 90 days to 60 days. Is-
Correct.
That's the substantive change. But, and for the committee, you know, we have an inquisitive committee, so we could have you here all day talking about all these things, which is interesting,
I
actually.
think
It's
it's
really,
time to request a field trip.
yeah, I know.
So we're gonna take a vote.
We need.
So I just want to make sure that before we ask, we do have 10 more minutes, but just to make sure that there aren't any substantive questions for our witness today about the language that what's happening in the language in the bill. Right? About the language, yeah, I know that the Representative Campbell has a question too, but is it related?
No, it's more background.
Okay, so let's do this and then we can go to you. I think people will have time. Go ahead,
I
Representative.
guess this is tied to the language, but also I guess tied to enforcement. So we're, you know, on page 30 of about 309, we're saying the commissioner shall refuse issuance of a certificate of title if any required fee is not paid. So is that sort of like at sale, like if you're trying to transfer the boat? Yeah,
That's not the.
Section there. Oh,
He's here.
that's yes, sorry about that. Yep. I thought I had flipped to 31.
Yep.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, no, that's all we're already reflecting, which is the danger of when we look at these sections in isolation. We don't see. So, but that was, yeah, okay. So Representative Campbell.
Sure, it was all new to me, and I put it in this before, but how does the numbering work? So I'm imagining the numbering you see on the hull of boats, is that what we're talking about, numbering?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
So
So to follow, just, so frame your answer. Is the numbering that you see on a Vermont registered vessel different from New Hampshire? Does it say VT on it somewhere, or how do we know where it's registered?
if the state is in compliance with the federal regulations, there's a sequence where you would have your yearly validation sticker. You would have the 2-letter abbreviation for the state or territory that you're registered in. And then you have your number, which can vary slightly from state to state. Like some of the states need more numbers than others do. So it's as far as the numbering, it's the abbreviation for the state or territory, and then a number, 3, 4, 5 digits.
So if someone had to register in 2 states to be perfectly legal, they would have 2 numbers. It'd say VT something, something, and then it'd say NH something, something, for example.
Well, they can only be registered in one at a time, so they'd have to change it. Be that
Okay.
a magnetic sticker, if you knew you were gonna flip flop every year. I've never heard of that.
Okay,
But yeah, you would need to remove that number because it would be
you can only have 1 number at a time.
correct.
Yeah, sounds complicated. I don't have a vote, so. Thanks, I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Representative Walker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think so there's 30,000 boats registered by the DMV in Vermont,
Roughly,
and these all have to have this validation sticker.
yes.
And we just got done hearing all last year about how we need to get rid of registration stickers and get them off ATVs and snowmobiles. You think that somebody from the DMV should speak to why these vehicles need stickers versus why we got so much effort to get rid of them on the others?
But I would, yeah, I'd love to hear.
The answer is it's another federal requirement to have this validation sticker on all vessels annually. And when DMV was proposing removing the validation sticker, we had a conversation, and I spoke with Deputy Commissioner Mike Smith and explained that as part of the RBS grant and the federal requirements, we needed to keep that validation sticker, and he agreed that that was a requirement and was worth keeping, and they would not strike or remove that from their services.
Thank you very much.
I had the same thought, actually, so question, so that's good to get that background. Yeah, since we had a lot of sticker discussion
Yeah.
last session, we were kind of.
Very sticky about it.
Yeah, very sticky, about stickers. It might come up. Representative Campbell?
Yeah, and to follow up, so we have one number, one registration per vessel, but we could have multiple stickers for different states. That's all.
You would have one a year, but if you went to another state, then you would need to get a validation sticker from that state and say, put it on top of the prior state for the new body of water that you were in, potentially.
So again, it's one sticker.
And- One sticker per vessel. It's similar to license plates on cars. You can only have one displayed at a time.
So the number is, stays on the vessel. Let's say you have a vessel that you keep for multiple years. The number stays on the vessel, but the sticker gets updated every year.
Correct. And that's a visual
Right.
ability to see from a distance that that is registered for the year.
Right.
And
Okay.
sort of like inspection stickers.
Yeah.
And just like cars, boats move to different bodies of water, so they go but it's really, this is addressing if a boat has not been in the state with more than now 60 days. That's where
Correct.
it gets at this. Did you have a follow-up question? Sorry.
No, I was thinking about inspections, but let's not talk about that.
Okay.
Sorry to bring it up.
Representative Couch?
Yes, thank you. And you might not be able to answer this, but we had some testimony about changing the way cars get registered, that people from out of state were coming here to register their cars because there was some monetary advantages or some advantages to it. Do you know how our annual boat registration costs compared to other states, and whether people might, and if at all, people might be taking advantage of that? Because I could see somebody with a boat who, stays on it all the time, and they're here in Vermont in the summer, and then they go south with the boat and spend 6 months, 9 months elsewhere. And so that's, I get it, it's the federal rules, but that causes some confusion of, where you register your boat. So I'm wondering, is there an advantage to register in Vermont?
Well,
Does
you're
that attract?
asking a question that I'm hoping to address next year. We weren't ready to address it this year because it's complicated, but vessel registration is another area that the fees that we need to address based on this Coast Guard review. And it is a large issue across the country right now, where the items that we need to update are very similar items to many of the states. I think there are approximately 30 or 35 states and territories that are out of compliance with the Coast Guard right now. And most of them are all for the same general issues. Big ones being the fire extinguisher, this 60, 90-day reciprocity, then vessel registrations. Without going too into it, the Coast Guard says vessel registrations shall only incorporate the fees required to verify the HIN and actually document and register the vehicle. We currently have our fee structure incorporates sending that money to fund various other projects, which the Coast Guard says it can't do. So many states are facing needing to change their registration fees and the fee structure. Some states have already made that change. New Hampshire's in the process. Maine has made the change. Connecticut has made the change. So the fee structure will change in Vermont. There's no huge benefit, and the Coast Guard is trying to make all fees fairly uniform. There will be some variation in the fee charge from state to state because it's more complicated in some states than others, but they're trying to minimize that, which is another area that will need to be addressed in the future. There is a problem that the voting law administrators have identified where people, for registering in different states, they will come to states that don't require a title to register stolen vessels and then essentially wash the vessel and get a title in another state, and then they have a clean title and they sell it. So there is some back and forth with registering vessels, particular stolen vessels. Vermont has not seen a huge impact from what I understand in that because we require titling and checks that some of the other states don't require. I hope that answered your
Yeah, no,
question.
and just to follow up, I had heard that, the cost that right now, some of that registration money goes to the A&R to help them with some water quality or, things with water. And the Coast Guard now is saying you can't take those funds that you get for registering boats and put it somewhere else. It just needs to be whatever it costs to register and maintain that process. So that change will probably come next year.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
We have a working group because it impacts multiple agencies that receive funding through the vessel registration. So we're trying to find an equitable way to deal with that right now. But that is one task in front of us.
There's a lot to it. Any final questions? Yes.
There's more to it than.
Yeah,
first
there's always more something more to, well, really appreciate you, you coming in and talking with us, Sergeant, about this and giving us some context, so for the language in the bill. And, this is great. So, thank you.
Can I just ask one last question? What's the value of the grant that we get from the Coast Guard for each year or the last year, roughly? How much?
So approximately $1 million. It fluctuates. We don't spend all of that in Vermont usually, and we can carry over the funding for 3 years before it gets returned back to the grant and redistributed. So we have access to more than our annual allotment if we dip into our reserves from the previous years. So in general, if we were able to provide the match and meet the requirements, access to $2.5, $3 million. But each year we get about $1 million in funding from the Coast Guard, which is what we use for pretty much all of the marine enforcement and incident response in the state.
Thank you.
We were scheduled to take a break and I'd like to do that. If remember, are you available, if there were any lingering questions, could cure interest about the work that you do, are you available to stick around for a few minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can.
Great. Well, with that, I want to, we have a long day today. I want to just take our break. And we'll be back here at 10:30 to continue our work on the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. Okay.